And now he wanted to donate his pictures and his sculpture to the American people. He hoped his art might become the nucleus of a great national collection, and to further that aim, he was willing to build a great gallery in Washington and to provide it with a handsome endowment. But he needed the president's consent, and also that of the Democratic-dominated Congress, and he needed it fast, for Mellon had been stricken with cancer and must have known that he did not have much time left. Roosevelt promptly gave his authorization. The necessary legislation was soon passed, and work on the gallery began in midsummer 1937. Soon after, Mellon died, with the outcome of the tax trial still pending, and his own reputation at best problematic. But in his last months, he had brought to fruition an unprecedented gift to the American people, who, in recently re-electing Roosevelt, had repudiated virtually everything that Mellon himself was deemed to have stood for and believed in. It was a remarkable and ironic finale to a very remarkable life. Andrew W. Mellon was born in 1855, 6 years before the American Civil War broke out, and he died in 1937, when Pearl Harbor was barely 4 years away. At his death, he was himself half the age of the United States, and for much of his life he played a formative part and significant role in its history. Indeed, the years from 1865 to 1933 have rightly been described as the Age of Gold, when the United States became the first billion-dollar country, and the fact that they almost exactly encompass Mellon's life is not coincidence. As a Pittsburgh banker, he financed and facilitated the massive industrial expansion of western Pennsylvania and beyond in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, making himself a prodigious fortune. A lifelong Republican, he became the most highly acclaimed, longest-serving, and most controversial Secretary of the Treasury in modern times. Although he prided himself on wealth without ostentation and a restrained style of life, he was the supreme and unrivaled collector of his generation, and the National Gallery of Art was a unique instance of self-effacing, patriotic generosity. Mellon was thus preeminent in 4 fields of endeavor: business, politics, art collecting, and philanthropy. And this was a distinction he shared with none of those near contemporaries, among them Rockefeller, Carnegie, Frick, Ford, Morgan, and Hearst, who were sometimes lumped together with varying degrees of appropriateness and plausibility as the robber barons. In its length, its range, its importance, its accomplishments, and its long-term significance, Andrew Mellon's was one of the biggest American lives of its times. And, like the lives of many of his wealthy contemporaries, it was also tainted by controversy, almost continuously during the last 2 decades. As a banker and venture capitalist, Mellon was criticized for being intransigently anti-labor, for being indifferent to the wretched deterioration of the Pittsburgh environment, and for his unfair and monopolistic business practices, and as a result, the companies in which he was a major shareholder were regularly in court from the 1910s to the 1930s. Unlike those of his parents and his brothers, his marriage was brief and unhappy, ending in a sensational and acrimonious divorce trial lasting from 1910 until 1912. His low-tax, pro-business policies while he was Secretary of the Treasury were severely criticized by such prominent opponents as George Norris, James Couzens, Wright Patman, and John Nance Garner, culminating in demands that he be impeached for impropriety in continuing business activities while holding high office. In 1933, the muckraking journalist Harvey O'Connor published a savage indictment, Mellon's Millions, which charged him with corruption, monopoly, and ill-gotten gain, and depicted him as a compulsively greedy monster. And all this was but the prelude to the infamous tax trial that followed. Like many men with a Midas touch, Mellon's personality was both complex and flawed, and while he was outstandingly successful in business, he was a conspicuous failure in personal relationships. From an early age, he was by turns shy and sad, silent and secretive, self-sufficient and self-enclosed. Despite a large and loyal family, he was always a loner, cut off from close contact and fenced in against the world. He made little small talk, was a poor public speaker, rarely smiled, and hardly ever laughed. Perhaps in an effort to break out, he launched himself headlong into an ill-judged marriage, which brought him more humiliation than happiness, and which drove him even further in upon himself. After his divorce, he confined his attentions to beautiful women long since dead, but immortalized by such painters as Gainsborough and Reynolds. Two-dimensional creatures, safely confined within their wooden frames, whom he owned and possessed completely, and who could neither touch him nor do him harm. Not surprisingly, he would become a distant and forbidding father, and both his children suffered in his dark and brooding shadow. His daughter, who became Ailsa Mellon Bruce, lived unhappy and insecure, and died lonely and unfulfilled. His son, Paul Mellon, would spend decades coming to terms with the double burdens of paternal disappointment and colossal inherited wealth. Andrew Mellon has now been dead for almost 70 years, but no full-scale life has been published during that time, and its absence constitutes a major gap in American biography and in American history. Shy in life, secretive in business, self-effacing in philanthropy, Mellon has all but vanished in death, except for his reappearance in two family sagas written in the 1970s, which were more concerned with unfolding a lively dynastic chronicle than with probing the complexities of any single life, however extraordinary and worthy of close attention. This biographical blank was not what had originally been intended. Soon after Mellon's death, Paul Mellon and Ailsa Mellon Bruce commissioned the Pulitzer Prize-winning author Burton J. Hendrick to undertake their father's life, putting him on a full-time salary of $25,000, but reserving to themselves the ultimate decision whether to publish or not. Hendrick's view, having already completed a biography of Pittsburgh's other Andrew, was that Mr. Mellon lacks the personal qualities that made Mr. Carnegie so attractive a subject, nor in other ways was he so great a man, but his career, both in public life and business, was an historic one. Beginning in January 1940, he worked his way through Mellon's letter books and volumes of press cuttings, all of which have subsequently disappeared. He conducted interviews with many of Mellon's, long since dead, relatives and business associates, the transcripts of which have been invaluable in writing this biography. And the whole thing was finished on schedule by March 1943. The 33 chapters comprise well over 200,000 words, and the still extant typescript remains the essential starting point for any subsequent biographer. But Hendrick's book was never published. While the Second World War raged, and while FDR was president, the life of Andrew Mellon was, as Hendrick himself admitted, a little remote from the interests that are now exciting the nation, and publication was postponed for the duration of the conflict. Andrew Mellon's tax affairs with the U.S. government had been finally settled, and the National Gallery of Art had triumphantly opened in Washington. It seemed better to let him rest in peace. At a time when New Deal liberalism was still in the